Right, good afternoon, colleagues. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Phil Levy, I'm the PVC Student Learning. And as Pascal said, I'm going to be talking about the teaching portfolio. Really, I think what Pascal's been emphasising so strongly in her talk, I also want to start with, which is that the panel are looking for reasons to promote you. And so in relation to the teaching portfolio, that stands. And this is all about putting yourself forward, in the best possible light in terms of presenting the excellence of what you do in learning and teaching at whatever amount of that that there is. And for some, there will be a significant amount of your workload is related to teaching. For others, that might be quite small. So I am aware that we're running a little bit behind, so I'm going to try and make my remarks relatively succinct, but also offer an opportunity for questions along at the end as well. I think the slides pretty much speak for themselves, so perhaps I don't need to speak at quite such length as I had planned. So this is about the teaching portfolio and the fact that teaching really matters. It's a really important part, really important component of your submission. And in thinking about the teaching portfolio, three key elements of this really. First, information about what you do. The panel needs to get a sense of what your teaching contribution is. So that's really quite factual stuff about the courses that you teach, the leadership that you've taken in teaching as a course coordinator or as a program director, and so on. Evidence of the effectiveness of what you do in teaching, and some commentary and analysis, some interpretive commentary and analysis about the evidence. So what really that's about, what are you doing with the evidence that you've presented about the quality of your teaching to further develop and continuously enhance your teaching. So those are the three components. And it's really, I guess the key point is it's more than just a shopping list of activities and contributions. That's the first bit of it. The panel will be looking for evidence of a scholarly approach to teaching. And the panel will be aware of the fact that there is there's a spectrum of activities involved in scholarly teaching, and that not everybody will tick all of these boxes. Some might well, but these are the kinds of things that you can demonstrate in your application to show that you are taking a scholarly approach to teaching from. I think some of them will apply to everybody. The ones down here, perhaps to fewer. But of course, maintaining deep knowledge of the discipline and its knowledge-creating activities. How is knowledge built in the discipline? Keeping abreast of contemporary developments in the discipline. So some evidence around that. And then being able to apply sound pedagogical principles to the teaching of your discipline, your subject. Being able to integrate discipline knowledge effectively in curriculum development, in the creation of learning resources, if that's what you do, perhaps in the writing of textbooks. And then providing evidence that you are a reflective teacher, so that when you do get feedback on your teaching, be from students or staff or other mechanisms for getting feedback on your practice, that you really do take that to heart, that you think about what it means, and that you translate that into enhancements, improvements, developments in the teaching that you do. It might be more or less formal, so critical reflection at one end of a continuum, and perhaps some of you may be involved in quite extensive and deep pedagogical research into what you do. That won't be the case for everybody, but it will be the case for some colleagues. Scholarship is also about, of course, sharing and disseminating what you know, what the results are of evaluation of research around teaching, if you're doing that, to peer audiences, and leadership contributions. And leadership contributions might include quite informal leadership in a local context, perhaps mentoring, a formal and less formal and more formal, but of course might involve your roles in quite a formal sense at, say, faculty level, at institutional level, or indeed in the wider national and international context. So scholarship, that's broadly what the panel will be thinking about when it's looking at your teaching portfolio and asking this question: is there evidence of a scholarly approach to teaching? These elements will be in their mind. Yeah.
What about original publications in teaching and teaching development? Is that leadership?
Yes, that would certainly be, yes, I think so, is the short answer to that. Certainly would be evidence, I think, of thought leadership and scholarly leadership, yes, of course, in the discipline area. So, yes, very much so. So I've mentioned this, the information is the kind of bedrock here. The panel needs to understand the scope, the scale, the nature of your teaching activity and the kinds of teaching that you do. In terms of the teaching methods that you use. And it will need to understand too the goals that you have in your teaching and the key achievements that you feel you have made. So the claims that you are making in relation to excellence in teaching. So for example, development of new courses or programs, examples that have led to improvements in student learning outcomes. So choose the information about which you are going to be able to provide evidence of effectiveness. Choose that information in particular. And examples of innovative practice, of course, where you have those. New approaches to teaching, to assessment, to the use of digital technologies, to the development of content, and so on. So evidence is all about evidence of effectiveness and beneficial impact in terms of the student's learning experience. And you might think in terms of a range of indicators there. So you might think about student satisfaction, but you might also think about student engagement, student retention, and of course student success. Student achievement and performance. Perhaps outcomes in terms of not only academic outcomes, but outcomes in terms of the employability of your students as well, what they take out with them from the experience of your teaching into their careers. So think about student outcomes in that broad way.
So in this context, does teaching include PhD or HDR?
Supervision is included there. Yes.
How are we supposed to apply HDR?
There's no CELTS process. So you would get, I think, again, it's coming back to Pascal's comments about an earlier question in relation to the clinical evidence. I think that's about having evidence of the success of your students, first and foremost, I think. But also you might have evidence from peers, from your head of school. You may have evidence from an external context too, depending on the context. There may be collaborators, there may be places to which your students have progressed that can provide evidence of the impact of what you do in your supervision. So there are ways that you can find evidence, I think. The key one, of course, I think always is going to be about the impact on student success and other related student outcomes.
Is the teaching portfolio only meant to cover a 5-year time period, or is it a career teaching portfolio?
It's the same time, unless I'm mistaken, it's the same time period as the submission as a whole. Yes.
That's not what my understanding of a teaching portfolio is, though. I always consider it to be a career portfolio.
Okay.
Continuously reviewed and built upon.
In this context, for the purposes of this process, it is the 5 years, what you have done in the last 5 years. I don't think it would be useless or set to one side if if you wish to contextualise your achievements over the last 5 years in relation to, you will be, as you say, you've been building your teaching practice and your teaching knowledge over a long period of time. I think it would certainly make sense to contextualise to some extent, but don't use too much space on that. I think you really want to be focusing on the last 5 years.
Sometimes, in fact quite often, evidence arrives that the effectiveness of teaching
Well
20 years
beyond,
ago.
yeah.
And sometimes it takes a long time for things to mature and things to flower.
Yeah, that's true of research as well, of course.
Yeah.
Evidence of research impact. But
So if the evidence is within the last 5 years, you can refer back to.
the evidence really needs to relate to the work that you are putting, the claim that you're making on the basis of the work that you're putting forward over the last 5 years. So, in terms of student outcomes, you might see some impact on student career path directions. You won't see that 20-year impact, and you are not being asked to find evidence for what you may have done as a teacher 20 years ago in this context.
But that's often the nature of the evidence.
It's very difficult. It may be more difficult to. It might be a claim that's more difficult to make. That 20-year, the impact 20 years down the line of a particular course or teaching approach. It may be, but you have that evidence. That's an interesting one, isn't it? The question of whether the evidence that you have of impact of some teaching that took place 20 years ago. Again, my feeling is that you might want to use it as contextualization, but I think as I understand it, the focus is really on that 5-year period. So, yeah. It's an interesting one. Any other questions about evidence? Okay. And so evidence of different aspects of what your teaching has achieved. You'll be thinking about student evaluations. So what kind of data can you use as evidence? Relevant student evaluations, of course. So that's CELTS.
Can I just check the TRP? I think it's going to be mandatory, but it's not this year.
It's not mandatory, and there is discussion about whether or not it may become mandatory. But that is an open question at the moment. It is not mandatory at the moment. It's an opt-in opportunity, and created absolutely for this purpose, actually, to provide an opportunity for colleagues who wish to go forward for promotion to draw on additional evidence around teaching excellence, to triangulate, as it were, around with CELTS and other evidence. So yes, so this is a peer review of teaching feedback, and there are 2 strands to our peer review of teaching scheme. The relevant strand for promotions is the TRP strand, which is designed specifically to enable you to provide you with evidence from 2 peer reviewers of your teaching performance in one particular hour's worth of sessions. If you haven't already got involved in this time around, you will need to look at that quickly, and if you'd like to do it, it's not compulsory, but if you would like to have that feedback, do take a look at the website as soon as possible and let the colleague know who oversees that you would like to become involved.
So you said the TRP, so the PARD-P is...
PARD-P is a formative kind of process, faculty-based.
So we shouldn't use that evidence?
So you can use that evidence, but it will not be as strong as the evidence for TRP, which is so PARD-P is more about it's taking different forms in different faculties, but it's more about colleagues buddying up and partnering to provide each other with feedback. Now, of course, it's great if you're involved in PARD-P. That in and of itself demonstrates that you are taking a proactive approach to the development of your teaching, that you're engaged in scholarly activity. And so doing PRP, being involved in peer review of teaching at that level is a great thing to highlight. The evidence from it is not going to be as powerful as the evidence from the TRP, which is based on peer review from two colleagues who will be from outside of your area, one very likely one from your faculty, one from outside of your faculty. So it's a different process.
That's only just recently.
It has only just recently launched, yeah.
Like myself, a number of people are actually on sabbatical, so we won't have any evidence.
As I say, that is, it is opt-in. It is not compulsory. It's a great thing to do if you have had the opportunity. You will not be discriminated against if you don't have that opportunity. It won't be the panel knows that it's a new thing, and that sometimes colleagues just haven't had the opportunity to engage. Yeah. Okay. You can see all those examples of evidence there. I'm not going to read them out in the interest of time, but a really wide range of evidence can be presented. So it's very flexible in terms of different profiles. The panel knows that very different teaching profiles and are involved in very different kinds of activity. I will mention CELT. Do think about how you present your CELT data. Think about response rate. So what kind of response rate you're getting, and the how much of a claim can be made on the basis of CELTs. I mean, CELTs, we live with it. It's what we have for student feedback. Response rate can sometimes be a concern, a worry for people wanting to use it in the context of promotions. A 30% response rate actually is pretty good in the context of CELTs. That is pretty good. So you shouldn't feel, if you're getting that kind of response rate, 25, 30, 35, that's strong in terms of institutional experience, and indeed institutional experience across the sector. Look at the spread of your results. Present it in the context of the length of your course, the extent of your contribution.
One thing apart from response rate is if your class is really small and they fall below that 5.
Yes.
The problem I have a number of years of postgraduate teaching, you have very small classes.
Yes.
It isn't really my fault, it's the marketing fault.
Yeah.
So I might be fantastic teaching those small classes, but nobody knows that because I don't know evidence.
Now, you can ask for an aggregated CELTs in cases where you do have classes which are very small. So you could, so aggregate it over a number of years, and present it in that way. So I would certainly pursue that. Yes. It is possible to request that. So you should certainly do that if that's the case.
We draw on 2 semesters in the last 3 years. What if teaching is fairly disseminated? I do quite a lot of summer schools,
Yep.
which is a semester in itself, right?
Yes. Well, it's a teaching period. That's fine. It's not a.
Or do I combine it with the first semester, or what?
I don't know what the technicality would be there, actually.
The process just requires 2 semesters in the last 3 years, so...
No, but there are different teaching periods, of course.
Well, it says summer semester, but is that part of semester 1? Or?
So we're talking about whether the summer school or the winter school would be part of the semester.
Yeah.
Technically it's not. They're different periods.
I need to get back.
I think you might need to get confirmation on that. It's not been asked of me before. I don't know. I mean, so in your case, you would be teaching, say, summer school and summer semester, or
Well, that's summer school and summer semester.
yeah,
Semester 1, semester 2, I teach.
yeah. You would want to be including your results from the summer and winter schools, is what you're saying.
Well, what I've read is we draw on 2 semesters.
Mm.
So my question is, does the summer semester get included with semester 1? Or is it regardless of semester by itself?
The summer school? Yes, okay, and that's what we need to clarify. So in terms of, so technically I think we talk about 2 semesters, winter school and summer school, and they are different periods. So we have 4, we actually have more than that because sometimes we have terms as well. So I think it would be worth clarifying after this. Yeah.
Because if it is regardless of semester by itself, it's just one course we're talking about.
Yeah. I mean, the key thing that you want to do is to be able to provide a substantial example of your teaching, and so the 2 semesters typically will allow you to provide that. If you weren't teaching in a semester but you were only doing a summer school, then you would put that forward, I guess. I think you need to clarify that.
I might be, had a similar situation.
Yeah.
We have trimesters as well.
Yeah.
In my head, I assumed when I read it, I just read teaching periods.
Teaching periods.
Rather than reading semester.
Yeah, 2 teaching periods. I think it would be helpful to give clarification to this group after of that. That would be my assumption, but let's just for the sake of clarity. Yeah. Okay. When you're using CELTS, do look at the broad agreements and present your broad agreement scores, and in comparison with the broad agreement aggregates, particularly where you can where you can show that your scores are higher than the average, then you've got a really good story to put forward there. And don't forget the qualitative feedback that you get as well, which is often very illuminating from students about the impact that you have had on them. And then you need to provide some analysis and commentary on what it is that you do with your evidence. When you get evidence of feedback from students, feedback from peer review, and indeed other colleagues, how do you respond? How have you made changes to your practice in response to that? Might there be some cases where you have decided not to take a course of action that students have been requesting for a particular reason? That's fine. It's about your professional judgment in relation to the feedback that you receive, and being able to put that forward. So really that brings me to the end of what I was going to say. Your teaching portfolio is up to 6 pages, as you know. It is evidence of the way in which you think about teaching, what you do, your achievements, your accomplishment, the feedback that you get, and what you do with the feedback. And it reflects a scholarly approach. More questions?
I don't teach a great deal, but
Okay.
I manage a team of teachers. Can I cite there? They've done really well. But a lot of that, I think is due to some of the changes that I've faced with the teaching. Can I cite their achievements and my part in that with evidence?
Yes, absolutely. So that would be about your leadership.
Yeah.
Of teaching and management of teaching, but particularly leadership and shaping. If you've supported the design of the curriculum, the way in which new teaching approaches have been adopted in that area, and you have evidence of the beneficial impact of that, then that's certainly something that you can cite, whilst being clear, of course, who the different contributions and the role of your contribution in that. Yeah. Thank you very much, colleagues, for your attention. As Pascal said, good luck. Good luck doesn't come into it, but it is all about putting together, a teaching portfolio that is really going to bring to the fore the real highlights in terms of the excellent impact that you have on students. And I can't emphasize enough, I think, it ultimately it is about outcomes for students. So that's the kind of evidence that you really want to put to the fore.
Again, for doctors who are different.
Yeah.
They're told that they apply for 3 categories, not 4. Can they drop teaching? And then if so, do they need a teaching portfolio?
If it's 3 categories, not 4, then I would assume that
For
you...
level D in medicine, that's
Yeah.
all.
Okay.
You need to contact Hub. I talked to you about that at the beginning,
Yeah,
so
but
you
can-
need to contact Hub.
We just did, and she said 3 out of 4, but not which ones.
Okay.
Is it legal to drop
No,
teaching?
it would be admin or professional activity, one of those.
Right, so you can't drop teaching.
Or research, no,
Yeah.
teaching research
Yeah.
always.
Yeah, yeah. For those who teach, then yes, teaching would be there. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, colleagues. And I'm going to hand over to my colleague Julie.